Steve Englehart's fingerprints are all over popular culture right now. He's a renowned comic book writer who created Star Lord and Mantis from Guardians of the Galaxy, created Shang Chi, the Master of Kung Fu, big movie of his coming out this summer. He created seminal storylines for Batman, made into the 1989 Batman movie, and Captain America, as well as writing Justice League, Green Lantern, The Avengers, you name it. Steve's done it. Steve, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
So much of your stuff has just jumped off the comic book page into other mediums. What makes a comic book story rise above the costumes and the punching?
Well, the people in the costumes. That's always been my thing, as wanting to know who these people were, what they were thinking while they were doing it. When I did Green Lantern, somebody said to me, how can you do a group where everybody has the same power? And I said, it's not about the power. It's about the people with the power. And that was always, again, what I was looking for. Who are these people?
Why do you think these characters are so popular in the culture right now?
I'm really hard put to say. I have had a theory about why they were popular when they started in the 60s, because everybody wore costumes in the 60s, bell-bottom pants and leather vests and Beatle haircuts and the mods and the rockers and all that sort of thing. So it was an era of dress up and fantasy and drugs, all that good stuff. So it made sense that comic books would rise with that. I'm not as clear as to why. I mean, the movies are good, the Marvel movies, the DC movies not so much, but the Marvel movies are good. But exactly why they took off and so forth, well, I mean, again, they are building the Marvel universe, which was part of what made Marvel work in the first place. If you buy in, you're buying into everything, right? And each new installment feeds that and leads you to the next step. I mean, that's all good Stan Lee, based storytelling concepts. But why they're so huge, I couldn't tell you.
Well, it's certainly something that you worked on a lot. You wrote Avengers and Defenders at the same time, two superhero teams that intersected in one big crossover event, kind of the first big event. Why do you think that interlocked world works so well?
Well, I loved it. Because it creates the sum of the whole. I mean, it's like you're in an actual alternate reality and it holds together. If somebody meets somebody, he remembers that he met that person later on, if they did this or that. I was a huge fan of the continuity. Yeah, I totally understand that now, 60 years in, you can't write stuff that says, yeah, go see Fantastic Four number 14. So continuity had to sort of give way, but the Marvel movie thing again is building it up again because they're still new enough that they can do that. When it gets to be 2050 and we're into Guardians of the Galaxy number 7 or 70 or whatever, and they say, oh, go back and look at that early, but everything's on video now. You can do it probably. It'll probably work. But it's the universe. It's the people, that, as I said, and the fact that the people, again, have a reality that surrounds them that makes sense.
Yeah, the continuity, like you said, it was simpler when you were writing because it was shorter.
I was only 10 years. 10 years.
How did you handle the continuity issues?
I just used it. I mean, to me, that was endemic in the Marvel thing. And when I took over the Avengers from Roy Thomas, who took it over from Stan Lee, the Thor, the Captain America, the Wanda, all these people that I were writing, they were the same people. They hadn't been retconned. They still had a history for that 10 years that preceded my arrival. And I kept that going. 20 years later, maybe in the 90s, was when people first started to really have trouble with having to hold all that together. And it's obvious, and it's also sad in a sense, because it does kind of fragment and now everybody feels free to retcon everybody all the time. So you're dealing with this year's Captain America, or, this week's Batman, or whatever, as opposed to the character who was continuous, had continuity.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see how they're going to handle that in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. They've already chosen not to recast the Black Panther.
Right.
It looks as though Robert Downey Jr. won't be playing that anymore, playing Iron Man anymore. It looks like Chris Evans won't be playing Captain America anymore.
Right.
They've been seemingly quite happy, or willing at least, to retire main characters.
Well, they have a lot of characters, right? I mean, they went with the big guns first. So are you going to replace Captain America one-on-one? Hard to say. But they have a lot of characters. They do them very well. Okay, so I'm a comic book writer. That's basically what I am. I've done many other things outside of comics. And one of the things I did was television. I created a character called Nightman, and then it became a television series filmed in British Columbia, second season. I learned the rules of television for the first time. I did a script in which people came out of a building and there was a crowd out there. And I was told by the showrunner, who shows up on screen, so there's going to be two people out there, not a crowd. The idea that you're working with people who have to get paid and may not want to keep doing it, that's built into the whole live action thing. And I know no more about the movies than you do. They're very good about giving us credit when they use our ideas, but they don't consult with us. So I don't know the inner workings of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but I would guess that they figured that out very early on. That Tony Stark's not going to be here forever, and we're going to have to go to whatever phase we're in at this point, to keep it going. And now WandaVision's come out, and people like WandaVision, and she's all set up for the Doctor Strange movie, which is going to come, so, and they still do have Doctor Strange. They still have people, they have some big guns that didn't retire. So I would expect that they have that figured out. The answer, what they figured out, I don't know, but I would suspect that they do.
They haven't made a mistake so far. Since we've just mentioned WandaVision, you married Wanda and the Scarlet Witch in the comics. What did you think of WandaVision? I
liked it. I also gave them the kids, right? I mean, her whole fantasy in WandaVision was basically, it was a takeoff in that they wanted to do the Dick Van Dyke Show too. But I mean, the idea of getting married, moving to the suburbs, having kids, that was all that Richard Howell and I did that. That's what our Wanda and Vision series was. So again, I'm pleased when they take ideas that we had and use them. Captain America, I would mention, I did a Watergate thing once that basically established him as somebody who stands for the ideals of America rather than the government of America. And that just became the default Captain America. That's the one Chris Evans played. So I see my ideas, and Guardians of the Galaxy, so I see my ideas coming around and getting recognition. And I will say, when I and everybody else did this, it was pop culture. I mean, for some reason, we all wanted to write comic books, but it was understood that comic books were a periodical medium. And so the idea that 50 years later, people would still be able to get them because they're being reprinted all the time. The idea that they would be making movies out of them that would be, huge blockbusters, that was never in our consciousness back in the day. And if anybody around on listening to this remembers the 70s, which probably proves you weren't there, they had two really bad Captain America movies, and they had one mediocre Doctor Strange movie, and they had some weird cartoon things, but it was the idea that comics would ever transcend that. Stan Lee might have been the only one who held out hope for that. The rest of us were happy to be doing it in the moment. I mean, we liked comics, we liked doing comics, fine. But all this stuff that's come on the back end is gratifying but unexpected.
Well, I can tell you that I dreamed of it and was so happy when they came out, and they were good. When they were good, that was a huge, huge relief to me, because it's something that I dreamed about seeing in an Avengers movie since I was a kid. Yeah. Some of your things have been interpreted quite true to the source materials. Others maybe not so much. What's it like to see some like a character, for instance, like Mantis, appear on the screen, but not look so much like the Mantis you created?
Well, so they don't consult with me. Conversely, I don't consult with them. They're not, if I say I like the Marvel movies, that's because I like the Marvel movies. It's not because of they're paying me under the table or anything like that. So I've been clear that I wasn't happy with the Mantis that they did, in terms of not being the character that I spent a lot of time creating. But I was at a comic book show actually in Vancouver 2 Marches ago, and met Pom Klementieff, who plays her. And the first thing she said to me was, "I hear you don't like my Mantis." And I said, and the answer is, I like your Mantis. I like the movie. That's just not my Mantis, right? I would obviously prefer to see my Mantis, but the character she's playing is a likable person. So yeah, that's the one I know. She had a distinctive speech pattern, all this different stuff that they got rid of. So not having any control over the movies, things like that are going to happen. But that doesn't, if I like the Screen Mantis, which I do, then I don't. I mean, I get it, but I'd rather have the one I did.
It's gotta be, you may not be kicking a garbage can on the way out, but it's got to be a little bit of it. Oh man, especially Mantis, which was a real signature character for you, and was, this Mantis is such a peacemaker, and your Mantis was such a disruptor. Yeah. It's not that it's just a little off; it's that it's quite different.
The only thing that they share is they're both female. I mean, looked at, skin color, speech pattern, origin story. If they hadn't, and I also get that to most people going forward, that's the real Mantis,
Yeah.
I get that. But I asked James Gunn at a post premiere party. One of the benefits of all this is you get invited to Hollywood for the premieres back when they used to do that. I just sort of sidled up to him and said, I understand nobody wants a writer coming around going, why didn't you do it my way? They're doing their thing. They had to put together a whole package that actually worked on screen. So I get it. Right. So I asked him, and he said, well, I just needed a character that fit that role. So I made her that character. Right? Okay. I would say, don't call her Mantis then. But on the other hand, I get to walk around now going, hey, I created Mantis, and people know who that is. So it's like, it's the typical writer's place in the hierarchy of Hollywood, right?
Mm-hmm. I want to talk. You mentioned Captain America, and you mentioned that Watergate story. I want to talk about that a little bit, because that Captain America story the Secret Empire. In that one, I made a few notes on it because I didn't want to get a few things wrong. In that story, it culminates with a fascist group trying to take over America, landing in Washington for a big coup. And, they influenced America through a propaganda campaign in the media of lies, which should sound familiar. They had a committee to regain America's principles, which sounds as close to make America great again as you could get. And in the big culmination, for anybody who's watching this as opposed to just listening to this, here's the frame. Captain America confronts the leader, and it is the President of the United States. And even at 11, I knew it was Richard Nixon. And his words were, "High political office didn't satisfy me. My power was still too constrained by legalities. I gambled on a coup to gain me the power I craved, and it appears that my gamble has finally failed." And in the comics, he does himself in. But man, I thought about that on January 6th. What went through your mind when you saw it on January 6th?
Well, it was just the culmination of being disappointed in seeing it a second time. I thought when I wrote that back during Watergate that was a one-off, that we would never see that again. I just, I'm interested in people. I'm interested in reality. I just, that's just me. And so I thought Captain America needed to react to something that was that important going on in America. And so I wrote that story and just tried to figure out, what would be the motivation for the guys who were trying to pull this all off. That didn't require a lot of brain power on my part. I mean, I just looked at what they were doing and so it never, but I didn't think they'd do it again, it is weird how close the two storylines are. But the difference is there were still rules in the 70s. Nixon there were things beyond which he would not go. And so in the end, he couldn't escape his fate. Trump would have gladly gone beyond any boundaries if he could have gotten people in Georgia and other places to go along with him. I mean, we're fortunate that he was such an idiot. He definitely wanted to be the dictator of America, but he wasn't very good at doing the things other than just sort of asserting authority and he got quite far with just sort of making people either stop him or not stop him. And everybody sort of said, well, we don't really want to, but
if he was actually good at his job, we might have needed Captain America.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like, if I gave you the concept of the dictator of Canada, would that make any sense to you, really? I mean, it's like you don't expect liberal democracies to, to ever get close to having a dictator. And that's what he wanted to do, but he just wasn't good enough to do it. So to answer your question, I mean, I never expected to have to go through that twice. And the whole thing was just, like living with an abusive husband or father or something for 4 years. And it really, again, I don't know what it felt like in Canada, but the day that they finally decided, yes, Biden gets the votes, Biden is in, January 6th didn't stop that. There was just this wave of relief over America, probably over the entire world. But I mean, people just felt like, oh man, am I glad that's over.
I'm an American living in Canada. I have dual citizenship. I moved to Canada from the States when I was 8. During the Vietnam War, Americans weren't very popular, but I've had to register for the draft. The taxes we have to file now as a Canadian in America, or at least the forms you have to file, are ridiculous. I feel I've earned my Americanness that I still have. Yeah. But in Toronto, so I was extremely happy. And in Toronto, people were thrilled. My phone started buzzing as soon as it happened. We were pretty tense. My father said that he's 88. He's going to be 88 at the end of the month. He didn't want to die with Trump as president.
Right.
And I could relate to that. But let's talk a little bit, since we're into Captain America land here, let's talk a little bit about Captain America. When you took over that character, he was very much the focus of the character was that he had missed a couple of decades. He really wasn't with the times. He was more a man of the 40s than a man of the 60s, which made sense because there was such cultural change. But you made a fundamental change to the character that has resonated. What was that change?
Well, that was changing him. They were selling him as the living legend of World War II, which, first of all, doesn't, in the 60s and 70s, World War II was a while ago. The people who were reading the comics weren't there for World War II. And also, it was Vietnam time, and people weren't real thrilled about Americans in wars, So the series was really just about to get canceled. It was either going to get canceled or cut back in frequency or whatever. And every other writer at Marvel basically had taken a shot at it, and nothing could change Captain America's sales. So they gave it to the new guy, me. And I went home and came up with this idea that maybe he stood for American ideals, the stuff they teach you in school, rather than any particular American government and a particular reality. And that changed the book overnight. I mean, we were newsstand sales in those days, and things could change that quickly. So 6 months later, it had gone from almost being canceled to Marvel's #1 book because of that change, which of course gave me a career because I thought of it. But I mean, that was another step in a very early step for me of kind of going, who is this guy? If Captain America really existed, who would he be? And what did he, okay, he was created in World War II. Well, let's forget about the war part. Let's think about the Franklin Roosevelt liberal New Deal part of being, we're all in it together, that kind of thing. It was me trying to get a job, keep a job.
It's a pretty good motivator.
Well, yeah, a pretty good motivator. And fortunately, I came up with the right idea. And as I said earlier, that's now the default Captain America. That's the guy that, we've all forgotten about the living legend of World War II. He has that history, but he doesn't walk around proclaiming that part anymore. I will say one other thing. I've asked this when I've gone to other countries, and I'm only halfway into Canada since you're only halfway Canadian, but I've said, does Captain America mean anything to you if you're English or if you're, Danish or if you're Russian, whatever? And the general answer is, yeah, he's a character. I get him. So I've wondered about that, but it seems as if he's sort of become a universal. He's not a niche character. Clearly he's not. But I wonder sometimes, if you're not American, what do you get out of the idea of Captain America?
Well, I think the idea you get out of Captain America, I'm going to bring in this, and it's from your run, and it's what we've been seeing, is this right here. This is from your run where the Captain America of the 50s, the very conservative, McCarthyist Captain America, is brought back and faces off against the Captain America we all know. And you may not have known it at the time, but we certainly have seen it lately, which is the idea of this conflicted America, that America isn't one thing, it's a few things, but still at the heart of it, I think the world, maybe I'm being naive, the world wants to believe in an America that's, going to the moon and is Superman and is that great document. And, to me, that's what I think when people like America, that's what they like about it.
I think, there's a lot to like about America. We've certainly been learning, starting back at Watergate and maybe long before that, that there's another side to America. And those of us who would like it to be better have done whatever we can do. I'm not a politician, but that's why I say the ideals are somewhat universal, and if America lives up to them, we're big enough and powerful enough that if we live up to them, then hopefully that can be the, the shining city on the hill that Reagan used to talk about, the light, blah, blah, blah. But anybody who just says, yeah, that's America, has missed that whole other part. Hopefully we're right now in the process of trying to figure out how to do race better. And again, that seems to be, as Meghan and Harry seem to indicate, that seems to be something that a lot of people are going to have to try to deal with. I think the promise, and I'm an America in America, so my bubble is my bubble. But I mean, the promise is making things better. And we don't do it very often, but we sort of have done it over time, and so I'm hopeful that now with Trump out of the way, there's still a bunch of crazy people wandering around, down here. But I'm hopeful that maybe we've turned a page and that we're going to move forward for a while. I've been saying for 21 years, I want to live in the 21st century. I want to move forward. I want to go somewhere here, and so maybe we are. Too soon to say, but people are working on it now, at least.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask you about another iconic character that you came along and had a big hand in reinventing, and that's Batman. The Batman that you wrote is the one that appeared in the first Michael Keaton, Tim Burton movie. You wrote the treatment for that. They brought you in because they didn't really get Batman. What is it that people don't get right about Batman?
That he's a person, that Bruce Wayne is inside that suit. I would not and did not, spend an infinite amount of time on Bruce Wayne. I mean, Batman is the guy, but the idea that it's just some random person wearing that suit seems to be DC's general approach to this whole thing. And the reason, that I think my version worked is because I gave him a sex life, which again was new to comics in those days. But Silver St. Cloud was an adult woman with agency, with intelligence, who would have to be that in order to be Bruce Wayne's friend, right? And so my story was not just about Batman. I did all the Batman stuff, Joker, Penguin, all those, Hugo Strange, Pulp. I went back and I really wanted to get back to the Pulp stuff that had been Batman when he first started, all that. But it had to be recast for the new age, and that was making him into a person. So the Michael Keaton movie, I thought Michael Keaton was an excellent choice for that. I mean, I know they wanted other people and they couldn't get them because big stars didn't want to spend the whole movie with a mask on their face. This was before the MCU, so it wasn't a thing that people wanted to do. So Keaton kind of got the job by default, but I liked him because there's a darkness inside Michael Keaton, even when he's doing comedy. But he's a human being, right? I mean, he could play he didn't look like a massive, and the current DC movies with Batman, they put him in these kind of Michelin Man suits and he bulks up and he talks like this. And it's like, yeah, but is there a person there, which they don't seem to be much interested in. So that was, I kind of distilled Batman down to his essence and then made the person who's in that world a real person. That's, simple as that. That's what I did.
I want to ask you about WandaVision.
Yeah.
Because you married Wanda and Vision. You gave them kids. What did you think of WandaVision?
I liked it. I was, it had all the Marvel touches. I mean, you think, well, the Netflix series, Daredevil, Jessica Jones, whatever, they were good, but they were kind of standalone. They weren't, they were on Netflix. And so if Disney is going to start doing all their Marvel stuff in-house, would this work out? And I, I thought that it did. I was, pleased, obviously, that her fantasy, albeit then spun through the idea of 50 sitcoms, 60 sitcoms, get married, move to the suburbs, have kids. It was the story that Richard Howell and I did. Agatha Harkness was in it. I mean, all that stuff. They don't consult. I can't remember now if I said this before or not.
Yeah, they don't ask you. They're not saying, Steve, come on over and just put a polish on it, right?
Well, I mean, they don't consult. So I saw each episode the same way you did as it premiered. They're going to do a Shang Chi movie. I know nothing about the Shang Chi movie except what I read in the papers, right? So I was approaching WandaVision. I was pleased to see that they were using my story. I enjoyed the thing, but could they pull it off as a TV series? And I thought they did. The ending was a little shaky, and from a character standpoint, maybe. Wanda never seemed to be too sorry that she enslaved that entire town. But I like Wanda's always been one of my favorite characters. Anyway, Wanda and Vision both. I've always liked them a lot. So at the end of the day, yeah, fine. I liked it. It was good.
What I loved about it, we watched it with my 16-year-old and 12-year-old son and my wife, and we were hanging on it every time. And there wasn't a superhero fight until the last episode. And even they kind of gave up on the fight in favor of a debate. Yeah,
which made sense for the Vision. I did think the fight was a little pro forma. I mean, they flew around and they did stuff, and they, but it looked good, and it is pro forma. It's the form. I really am almost totally satisfied. Mantis again, but I mean, basically, I'm satisfied with what Marvel is doing, what Marvel Studios is doing with their stuff. And as somebody who really liked and still likes comics, liked those characters, et cetera, it is very much fun to see them on screen doing stuff with good CGI. I mean, no longer these cheap knockoff things that they did in the 70s. So,
yeah, well, I can't even imagine what it's like to see the things that you've created, just sitting around thinking about them and hitting a deadline, be so well received and so well performed on screen. Just want to ask you a comic book story writer question.
Sure.
You write it, but you need a partner to draw it. What is that relationship like for you? Well,
I started out trying to be an artist. It was comic book art that really got me into comics. All this stuff about doing characters and all that came to me later. And I was living the life of a young artist when they asked me to write something, and it turned out I liked writing it, and they liked it, and they wanted to give me more, and so I left the art behind. But I've always understood always looked at comics from the standpoint of the artist as well as the writer. So when I do stories, I think them through to the extent that I need to. I mean, I want the story to be coherent, make sense, etc. I don't leave gaps, but I don't override. I don't give any more than I need to, because I want the artist to have as much freedom as possible to tell the story, tell my story, but tell it, in his artistic way. I personally, that's what I would want if I were an artist, and I think a lot of artists do. But I do know when I did Batman with Marshall Rogers, Marshall was very clear that he liked the other way, script in advance, like a film script, where each panel is laid out for you. So there's no one size fits all in that regard. But I've always been very attentive to the artists and tried to give them as much freedom and as much leeway, as is possible. But you do need an artist. It is, I will jump just sideways to say that Since I'm retired now, I still like to write. I'm not dead, so I like to write. And I set out to do this. I had this idea I'm going to tell this really quickly, but I had this idea for a town, to do a story about a town in which two of the people in the town become superheroes, but you don't know which two they are. And so the story is really about the 20 people in this town, two of whom have secret identities. And you might suspect other people have other secret identities, but not superheroic. In any event, I wanted to do this thing that had like 20 ongoing stories where everything moved forward for all the people all the time rather than concentrating on any particular thing. And I wrote it. And in order to do that, it is 7 graphic albums, basically, 60 pages each, 420 pages. It was only when I got to the end of it that I said, there's nobody in the world who's going to draw 420 pages. It's never going to be a comic. I mean, who would want to do that? Who would want to draw 420 pages? If it had been written, sort of as a series, maybe people might have gotten into it. But so in fact, my agent's now looking to see if it can be a Netflix series or something, where it could, we'll see. That, that's just a thing. But when I was writing it, I was just concentrating on, can I make this work? Can I do this as a writer? This is a challenge. Can I do this? And it was only when I got to the end of it that when I started talking to artist friends who were going, nobody's ever going to draw that. So, be nice to your artists, and don't write 420-page epics,
Well, I mean, I work in television and it's very collaborative. And my approach has always been, if you want to work with creative people, you better let them be creative. Otherwise, you're not going to get the best out of them.
Right. And I will say, I'll jump in on that, over the years, it always amazed me, the suits higher up in the comic book business. I never understood why people would go, I really, really like creativity. I think I'll go manage those people. It's like, no, let us be creative. That's what we want to do. That's what, if we can do it, then let us do it. But
and in your day, I mean, you were given, hit your deadline and you're off to the races.
Yeah, that was the big thing that I didn't understand at the time. But when Stan Lee hired Roy Thomas and Gary, blanking his name all of a sudden, Denny O'Neil. Stan hired Roy Thomas and Denny O'Neil to help him write the stuff. I went back and looked once. The month before he hired assistants, Stan was writing 13 books a month. At my best, I could do 5, and I preferred to do 4 books a month. That's a book a week, that makes sense. Stan was doing 13. So he hired assistants, and he drilled them. His theory was, everything sounds like me, and it has to going forward. And so you guys have to write the way I do. But when Roy became the editor, Roy said, go for it. I'm hiring now 6 people. I'm not going to try to make them sound like me, who sounds like Stan. And so I walked into a situation where they said, you have complete creative freedom, so long as you hit your deadlines. If you hit your deadlines and you make the book sell, all we care about, which was fabulous. It was perfect. And I had nothing to do with it other than walk in the door at the right time. Right. My wife tells me how lucky I am. And I was, all of us were in those days. Since then, there's been more suits, more, it's gotten more stratified. I can understand some of that, not all of it, But yeah, the reason that things were that good at that time, if I may say, was we got to do whatever felt like the right thing to do rather than having to run it through, a gauntlet in order to get there.
You can lose a lot in those gauntlets. And anytime you introduce money, there's going to be approval. And some of the favorite things I've ever done have been the least supervised, when people were too busy to be all in your business all the time.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh no, please finish your thought.
No, I did.
Steve, as a fan of your work, and I mean this so sincerely, I really appreciate your time. What do you hope people remember from your work?
I mean, that's hard to say. I took it seriously and tried to do the best I could. But as I said earlier, I didn't expect that 5 years later anybody would remember it. So the fact that it's remembered and reprinted and being used and all that stuff, that had nothing to do. Well, I mean, I guess the quality of the story was enough to make that happen. But I mean, I never set out to be remembered, you know. So I don't know what I would want people to remember. I mean, I just hope if 50 years from now they're still reading those stories, that would indicate that that was a high point in comic books and that comic books are still around and so forth, which I'm not sure they're going to be in 50 years. But then the movies will be here. That's an impossible question, really, because I hope people like the stories, and the fact that they still do is sort of amazing.
Well, for all the things we had to thank Stan Lee for, the one that I think gets overlooked the most was him putting the names of the artists on every book, like credits in a movie, because it really helped me identify which books I wanted to buy and who I really liked following. And go ahead.
Well, it's the same thing again about people, right? Once you know that artist is Jack Kirby, you tend to think, oh yeah, I have a connection with Jack Kirby somehow. Mm-hmm. Whereas if it's just art, you don't have that personal thing. It's exactly the same deal. And that's why when Stan walked around in the late 70s going, yes, I created everything, he got so much shit for it because he'd already let the cat out of the bag. And and he was Stan, he was a human being. He didn't mind having everybody tell him how great he was. On the other hand, he got the point, and so then he started to really back off from it and credit everybody and yeah, I mean it's all about people. I mean it's all, if you think it's just artwork or it's just film or it's just I mean, look at the credits on a Marvel movie. They're 5 minutes long and they're in tiny little type because they thank everybody now. Everybody gets credit now. And that's, I always look for my name, about 4 minutes in. Well, if it's a character I created, it'll be 1 minute in. Star Lord created by. And if it's just an idea that they use, that's the special thanks, which comes about 4 minutes in. Why they're not together, I don't know. They are on WandaVision, but I don't know why they aren't here. But you sit there if you're looking for your name, and I'm applying it to anybody whose name is up there. You're going to sit there, you're going to study it for the 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, and there it is, the driver in Georgia. Yeah, that's me. I mean, it's like people appreciate that sort of thing, and I don't know the driver in Georgia, and he's in my way because I'm waiting for my name to show up. But
it's like going to your kid's recital, right? You're waiting.
Yeah, but I mean, you look at a movie, probably as late as, you might know better than I, but I mean, probably as late as the 90s, even maybe even later. I mean, you'd have the movie, you'd have the stars, you'd have the director, you'd have the art director, you'd have a bunch of people, and that'd be it. You wouldn't have 5 minutes worth of credits. That's really, come on in the last 10 years, maybe.
Yep.
Giving everybody a credit.
Unfortunately for Marvel, we all sit through the credits now.
Right.
So we're going to see your name. Well, Steve, thank you so much. You started talking about the importance of having the person as a character in the story, and we finished talking about the importance of the people creating the stories and the characters. And, for whatever anybody wants to say about Stan Lee, he's one of my boyhood heroes. I certainly am grateful that the processes he put in place let me know who you were, so I can say thank you for all the great stories that I've enjoyed so much over my life. And thank you for taking the time to talk to me today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Are you a storyteller who wants to tell the story of how you tell stories? Yes? Then I want to hear from you. Drop me a line at craig@colbyvision.net and tell me a little bit about yourself, your career, and some of the particulars of your process. Colby Vision is a storytelling company working in the broadcasting and the business world. Send me an email if you need help with either. Thanks to Tim Vesely for the music, and Kevin Francisco for the graphics, and Dave White for the editing. And thanks to you for watching Narrative Drive Time.